Everybody will need a lot of empathy, understanding, education, advice, support, therapeutic alliance, and shared decision making. And each one of these could have a half an hour talk. So I'm just going to cover some points as we go through this. Issue number 2, I think it's really important in a very gentle way that all our patients, whether they're athletic or not athletic, understand we cannot fix them. We don't have that capacity. We can provide a lot of support and guidance, but we don't fix people. And I think we are starting to move away from the era of fixing, and we recognise that yes, some patients would come in and say, I really need the elbow in my shoulder and my back that I had previously. And the only reason they're coming in saying that is because they've experienced from us in the past. It's not because they woke up one morning and said, I need that. Now, of course, it would be, in my opinion, wrong to deny it. But I wonder if new generations of people need as much passive treatment as maybe the balance has been in the past. I haven't got access to the videos, but this is one of the greatest video. Can you just play that video, please? The one on the right? Is anybody there? Oh, okay. So, I was teaching in Dubai a few years ago, and somebody gave me this, and it works. I've used it in my clinic regularly since then, but I just love the fact he's got a rusty piece of metal and he's wearing sterile gloves. And so this idea of not fixing people and maybe reframing the way we provide care and the language we use was a feature of an editorial I wrote with Peter O'Sullivan and a seminar we did at WCPT with Boris and others in May in Geneva, and hopefully it will be an upcoming paper in the Journal of Orthopaedic Sports Physical Therapy next year. I think we also, patients, athletes and non-athletes want to come into our clinic, lie down and leave without symptoms. And it's as naive to believe that's possible as it would be for a person who suffers from diabetes to come in and say, I'm coming in with high blood sugars, I want to leave without high blood sugars. It would be as naive to say that as someone with high blood pressure coming in saying, I've got high blood pressure, I want to leave without high blood pressure. Same with asthma. Same with most of the persistent health problems. And what I think we need to do is explain to people, we can't fix you, there's a lot we can offer, but we need to follow a particular time frame. And this is Jill Cook's method of educating people. I think other people have borrowed it, but the original respect should go to Jill. So she might draw this graph and say to the patient, rehabilitation might take 12 weeks or so. It's not going to be a linear improvement. It's going to be a little bit up and down. And that's really important to say that on the first day. And I would give this diagram to a patient to take home, because if you draw that and the patient comes back a bit worse, you can say to the patient, and I'll refer, do you remember that diagram I gave you? Because the worst thing we can do is to tell a patient, you need an exercise-based approach. They come back worse, and we say, I'll forget those exercises. Let's try something else. We've just lost the patient. They'll have no more confidence in you. Now, of course, if the patient's doing that, I've made a terrible mistake. Rotator cuff-related shoulder pain doesn't behave that way. Is this the start of a frozen shoulder, a calcific tendinopathy, a sarcoma? But we would expect ups and downs, and that's critical to tell the patient that it's going to take around about 12 weeks. I'm going to say to the patient until we get the best result we can, because not every patient is going to get full resolution of symptoms. And so we've got to be honest with the limitation of what we can offer patients. And you're going to need to tell patients. You can also use this diagram to talk about lifestyle issues in the sense that, never be bullying a patient, but if a patient mentions they're smoking, you might want to have a gentle conversation about how you might not be able to get the best outcome you can in the presence of cigarettes. And during the rehabilitation, if you felt that you could maybe cut down a little bit or stop. There are so many ways we could support you with that, but completely your decision. But the patient needs to understand the real outcome is going to come from them and not come from us. We need to unload as required. And again, this is across all patient groups. So if the patient, in my experience, can cope with the pain, then they don't need to change their load. But most people say, I just can't. And that doesn't mean go to bed and watch television until you feel better, obviously. I would write these 3 letters on that piece of paper. So the patient's taking this home, and the IDF stands for intensity, duration, and frequency. And I'd get the patient to run an Excel spreadsheet or back of a cornflakes packet or whatever they want, and they're responsible for their management. So we're going to do little clinical experiments. We're going to reduce the intensity or the speed of your activity. Let's reduce it by a quarter. Let's reduce it by a third. Let's try a half. And let's see if that brings your level of pain to a level that's tolerable for you, that you can start your training at that point. I would always reduce this first. I think the duration and frequency, in my opinion, is interchangeable. You may disagree. And again, duration or distance by the same numbers, and then reduce the weekly participation. And you may, again, disagree with what I'm going to say, but I'll often say to patients who come into the clinic, I'll say, if I had a choice of someone coming in with a fracture or a muscle tendon related problem, I would take the fracture every day of the week. If you had a fracture in your leg, would you be able to play football? Would you be able to run? Would you be able to hammer nails into walls? Would you be able to throw javelins? And of course the patient will say, well, if I had a fracture, I wouldn't be able to do that. So what compromises could you make? And the patient mustn't leave your clinic thinking they've got a fracture. You'll be deregistered. But they have to understand that exactly the same respect you give a fracture, you give exactly the same respect to a muscle tendon problem. And maybe you actually give more respect to a muscle tendon problem because maybe they're even harder to reduce the symptoms. Find a safe entry point to rehabilitation and progress incrementally. There are lots of ways to try and find the safe entry point. We don't have time to talk about it. Some of it's a little bit controversial, but I think if we can provide our patients, we find a level that they can start exercising in and incrementally increase. And Marit was talking about that earlier in terms of, what happens when you go 60% greater, more than in a healthy person, you're putting yourself at risk of injury. So we need to progress incrementally and keep on progressing and not stop. I think we have to find appropriate rehabilitation progressions, and I believe with everybody who comes to our clinic, whether it's Usain Bolt or if I was to turn up in your clinic, what we have to do is we have to take patients on a journey to exceed their expectations. This would be a model that I would use, but again, not everybody would think this is right. Start with some motor control. I would use a lot of heavy slow resistance with all patients, and then start introducing mixed loads, ballistic loads, and introducing a lot of chaos. If we're sort of concentrating on external rotation exercises, that's not how the shoulder functions. That's a great exercise if you're treating a penguin or somebody who's got a deodorant problem. We have to think about all the different functions of the shoulder. So it doesn't make any sense to me if you're just giving an open chain exercise. The shoulder pushes, pulls, it throws, it carries, is used for precision. And we have to be giving patients a whole variety of exercises in our management. And just for the sake of time, we've seen some of these exercises that so we have to have all the different functions and chaos and fatigue, etc. And this is a great exercise for chaos because you can change the speed, you can change the position the ball lands in, etc. I think that's probably enough.